Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this Wellbeing Blueprint event, centering community, shifting power, and relationships. Please continue to introduce yourself in chat. Give us your name and organization, your location. Make sure when you're doing that in chat that you actually click and send it to all panelists and attendees so everybody gets to see who you are. Thanks again for being with us today. I am Tanya Tucker with the Full Frame Initiative, and FFI serves as the backbone organization for the Wellbeing Blueprint. And the Blueprint is both a growing community of action, a community of action made up of public sector, community, business, nonprofit leaders. It's also a roadmap to drive structural changes that will move our country towards equity, well-being, and justice, and towards a shared vision that everyone has a fair shot at well-being. And we know in order for the structural change that we're driving for, in order for that to be sustained, the transformation must center on community and what really matters to people. So we are thrilled to have with us today 3 community leaders to have a conversation about what centering community means. What does that look like when done well? As well as what are some of the common mistakes and missteps that we often make, even if we're well-intentioned when engaging and partnering with community. And we not only want to hear from our speakers today, but from you as well, our audience. And so we have Phyllis Becker, who is a senior fellow with us at FFI. She is going to be dropping a couple of questions in chat so we can get your perspectives and ideas and sharing some examples as we try to co-create together a definition of what centering community is, and examples of what we should be doing around centering community and the things that we actually should stop doing. So there will be a Q&A portion of the event. I'm going to have this wonderful conversation with these 3 great people, and then we'll have an opportunity to get your questions, and there'll be a couple of ways for you to submit questions today. You can use the Q&A function and submit your question there. And so you can do that throughout the webinar, and we will monitor that and be able to ask questions that way. And also, you know, as oftentimes with a webinar, we don't get to actually see and hear the people who have joined and are participating. So we'd love to, if you want to ask your question by using the raise hand function, do it that way, and we'll actually bring you out of the shadows, and you get to turn on your video and unmute yourself, and we can actually see the person and hear the person asking the question. So a couple of ways you'll be able to ask questions. Just a reminder that this event is being recorded, and so it'll be posted on the Wellbeing Blueprint website afterwards. And I think we can go ahead and get started and dig in. So I want to start with introductions. Obviously on the invite and the slide that you just saw, we've got each of your names and sort of a brief affiliation, but we know we're all more than sort of just a title or an organization name. So I'd love for each of you to introduce yourselves and just share, you know, a little bit about yourself and maybe some of the different hats that you're wearing. So why don't we start off, if you don't mind, Jose, could I start with you to introduce yourself?
Be good if unmute. I wasn't prepared, totally. Well, By way of introduction, my name is Jose Faust. I'm an artist in a really broad sense of the word. I write, I perform, I paint, I draw. The other part, I think, is being engaged in community. I've been called a community activist. It feels actually kind of like a hard name to carry. I feel more comfortable saying an engaged citizen of community. There's only one dictum I really have as in my practice. I try to live to it, fall sometimes very far from it, but the idea is to, I want to live in communities that I'm comfortable living in, and I want to help create those kinds of communities. And for me, that's what brought me to this discussion when Phyllis introduced me to the full frame.
Thanks so much, Jose. Yosefa?
Hi, thanks, Tanya. I'm Yosefa. I live in Orange, Massachusetts, which is sort of in the north central area. It's quite rural. I live on a goat farm with my family. I am a parent and I have 2 young kids home with me, so that may interrupt our conversation today. I think mostly what I'll be talking about today is in my role at a nonprofit, which is our local aging services access point called LifePath. And I'm a supervisor in the Adult Protective Services Program, which is the program that addresses abuse, neglect, and exploitation for people over 60 living in community. I think I should also say that I do birth work. In that role, I offer full spectrum doula services to pregnant and parenting people in early recovery and who are actively substance using. I do intend to focus mostly on my role today working with older adults, but in both of those roles, I believe that my work is to start to think really expansively and creatively about what caregiving is and how it can be really mutually fulfilling for everyone. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much. And Jeanette?
Thank you for the invitation, first of all. And when you asked about our role, I would have started with mother. I'm a mother of 6. But thinking about it, I said, nah, I have to say I'm a daughter because my parents are up there in age and I have to also be there to make sure that they're okay. So I'm a daughter, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I am a member of my community. I It looks like I have a lot of hats on, but I do have a lot of hair, but it's a lot of hats that I wear. And the most important one to me right now is the member of this community that I live in. And even looking at the chat, I do juvenile justice work. I'm with Justice for Families, a national organization that work with families directly impacted by the justice system. And when my youngest introduced me to the system, I couldn't believe how families and young people were treated. But the more families I got to meet and meeting Josefa and Jose and the work that we're doing, even though it's a different piece of a big puzzle, if we don't come together as one community to address all these issues that affect families, young people, and communities, we're gonna find ourselves trying to reinvent that same wheel when in connections and support, there's much that we can do in our communities. Our communities are suffering right now, and I don't know if you want me to continue, but just when you lose hope, you come out and you see the snow, and you're like, oh, it's cold. I don't want to walk in the snow, and I want to stay warm. But the snow gave me even more hope
All right.
because it's supposed to snow. I see something that's natural. That's supposed to happen. So even though some of us don't like the cold and some of us were talking about, oh, I'm in 60-degree weather, I love all seasons. I think our lives are like the seasons, some good, some sunny, we deal with
Yep, yep,
storms.
yep.
But I'm just
Thank you.
hopeful because of even the conversation that we're gonna have.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeanette. I really appreciate that. So I want to start before we even dive into centering community. I actually want to start with what is community to each of you? You know, how do you just define community? What does community mean to you? And if somebody wants to be brave and start, you can unmute yourself and do it, or I can call on you. Jeanette, were you waving it? Awesome.
I'm gonna
Thank you.
jump in.
Jump in
I'm gonna
there.
jump in.
Jump in there.
I'm ready. Exactly what we're doing right now. Bringing all the issues that impact families, that hurt young people, bringing all the influencers. You know, we talk about power and who has the power. But right now it's about people that have influence, that can give back and are mindful about the inequities and can look at those communities that for generations have been neglected. You know, when folks say, oh, we need to reinvest, I've been looking around and I'm like, I've never saw nobody investing, first of all, for you to reinvest. It's always looking to invest to get us out, but not to invest in the growth of our young people and our families and the communities. So centering communities is bringing health awareness to the injustice of the food disparities, bringing awareness to the injustice of the school to prison pipeline, you know, how we neglect our elders and they're being abused, how we see homelessness, how these systems that they were created to destroy families. So how do we partner with systems who have the money, because that's where the money's at. The monies are in these systems that are not using it the right way.
Thank you.
That are not.
Yeah. Jose or Josefa, sort of the general, just sort of
Yeah.
what does community mean to you? How do you define it? And then we'll dig in on what does centering look like.
I think for me, realizing what community is has been an education in terms of expanding my vision. I think when you're an artist, you have a community, you have your tribe, right? Whether it be you're a writer, performer, whatever it may be, there's a tribe that you affiliate with immediately. You have values, you respect each other's work, you help, in most cases. Uh, but I remember being invited, I got an email, and this happened to me many times in my life, so I think I'm doing something right. I got an email that I was invited to go to a reimagining of community over here in Kansas City in the Northeast area. And so I said, oh, okay, they invited me. I must be something. I know somebody. So I went. And when I walked in, I immediately realized I was in the wrong place. Everybody was wearing a suit. I came in like I just came out of my studio. And I walked in and I thought, oh boy. And I had already walked in, so going out was going to look really obvious. So I said, I'm going to take a seat, introduced myself, and found mostly bankers, community, I like neighborhood association, government people, civic and foundation people. And they started talking, and they started talking about community. And I was like in projects and community building. And I like, oh man, I'm really in the wrong place. And I was getting ready to leave. Then I had this epiphany. It's like, wait a minute, they're talking about creating community. An artist creates. I need to expand what my idea of community is beyond that and be a part of that conversation. So to me, that's kind of the idea. There's many factors that come together to create community. And often those voices come from the top down, the systems. And I think we forget that there are people that are affected by these ideas that actually could probably help define and point the direction for these things to happen. So that's where I feel community is being part of that whole conversation. As Jeanette said, all of us here. I was looking at the people that arrived too, and I'm very honored to be speaking in this platform, honestly, and a little intimidated.
No need to be. No need to be. Thank you, Jose. Josefa?
Yeah, I think that we find community every place that we're able to meet our human needs with each other and help each other. If we have to use the systems that are typically sort of like restrictive power and pushing us into smaller and smaller spaces and um, denying humanity. That community happens when, like Jeanette said in one of our planning meetings, something so profound that has stuck with me, when we go together into those systems, into those places, to be able to um, expand our access to basic human needs. That's community. And when we create spaces for each other where we can meet our needs without needing those systems, without requiring them, or with remaking them in our human image rather than in the images of um, white supremacy and colonization. I think I'd also like to share a very specific example, since this is such a big question, that one of the places where I see community in the organization I work with at LifePath is that we have this idea that is not ours. It's statewide and may even be a national imperative for when someone calls there, for there to be no wrong number. I think they use a phrase like no wrong door, right? And so people call for all kinds of things, and we all task each other with the commitment to figure out who you're talking to, what they need, what they're trying to say to you, and what you can do to help them with their problem or get them to the right place. Not like, I'm in this position and I do this thing and I know about this program and I can connect you with this person. We're not sending each other into endless voicemails. We're not sending each other into incomprehensible, phone menus. We're just trying to have a human connection within the system and use that system to create community as best we can.
Great, thank you. So I think that's a sort of wonderful foundation that the three of you have set for us to then be able to, I think, leap into this idea of centering community. And we use those words very purposefully, right? I mean, there's lots of other sort of terms you could use, right? We could have said this is about community engagement, or how do you do community outreach better? But there's something in centering community that is much deeper, I think, than simply, engaging community or conducting community outreach really conveys. So for each of you, when we say centering community, what does that mean? What does that mean? How would you define centering community?
I'll guess I'll jump in again first. To me, is bringing visibility to the work that we're doing, not isolating ourselves, bringing awareness that I see the issue, I see the problem. So centering community to me means visibility, means accepting that there are issues that need to be addressed. It's a stigma of, if I'm dealing with a certain system or I'm impacted by a certain system, that means I'm horrible and I need to be fixed. I'm broken, but it's not. When we do an activity with a crispy $20 bill and we crumble it up and throw it on the floor and rub it on the dirt and spit on it and step on it, and we open it back, and some folks want it, some folks like, oh, I don't want to use dirty, but the value of that bill doesn't change. So the value of the folks that are in my community hasn't changed. Where they talk about the Bronx, I'm in the Bronx, they talk about New York and how horrible the crime, but when I look out my window and I step out the door, I see humans. Josefa, just as you said, humans that need support, that need resources, that need for us to say, I see you and I'm here to serve you. Not just, some folks feel like working with the cream of the crop is what success looks like. No, success to me looks like when you can reach your hand to anyone that needs any level of support, whether it's with incarceration or the child welfare system or the mental health system, just bringing all those issues. My mentor, who passed away 8 years ago, and there's not one day that I don't bring her to life, and all the amazing work and how she inspired me. She said, until we don't meet the social and emotional component of young people in the school system, I used to work with the school system and families, it's going to be hard to really meet those needs and help them educationally. And I didn't think about it, you know, sometimes when things don't hit home, you don't know how horrible it is. And when it hit homes, either you get drowned and sucked into this horrible position that becomes a mental issue, or you can just stand up and say, i'm not going to allow uh I'm not gonna allow myself to just fall victim of statistics and lack of support. I think that centering our work is just bringing visibility and being there for that person. So because just as Josefa shared, um, we're not just giving a referral. We're making sure that that referral, their needs are being met, that if this young person or this family or community member is in need of support, that we make sure that we just don't give them a referral and say, okay, hope everything works out.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to come back to a couple of the things you said and pull on those threads, but I want to give Jose and Josefa a chance to answer that centering community.
Yeah. I think for me, it's this idea. I think that if you look at community and you identify community as having problems, then why must you then assume that only the solutions are going to come from outside? Isn't there something that has happened within the community that either it's not getting the representation, the community maybe is not ideally suited because banks don't want to invest in it? There's a lot of different reasons why communities get marginalized: race, crime, all these kinds of things. So to me, centering community is talking to the people that have been there and said, what cost this? I talked to the elders. They're the historians of the community. They can tell you where all the stories are at. They can tell you how it began to happen to them. They can tell you where the little stores that used to provide the food for everybody sat there, and they can tell you all the stories that happened there on the corner. And you drive by as somebody that goes to the community and you say, ooh, that's kind of a quaint looking building, without realizing at one time that was a store, that was a laundry. It changes the whole nature of the neighborhood. So you need to know those stories, and you need to go into those communities, center them, let them tell you your stories, let them tell you their monuments, and then ask them as well, well, what do you think are the solutions? Because if I come in and tell you, you know, we just need to spruce up these houses, and I start writing code violations, have I really listened to anybody? No, I've only listened to the people that want to see an eyesore taken care of, not the people who have to live in that eyesore, because you've walked away from all the investments you should have been making, because that's community, not just the ones that are going to attract the tourists, not the ones where the folk with mean are going to live, right? The ones with means. No, it's all of us. And I think every single bit of it. And I'll just add one great example for me that's kind of led to that fracturing of community. And now it's a moot point. But at one time when newspapers used to be predominant as a way for us to get information, there was a trend that began to happen about 20 some years ago, where all of a sudden they started to put inserts in the papers where it was a community highlighted, right? So you would get your newspaper, if you lived in Midtown, all the stories were about Midtown. And all of a sudden there were no stories about the other communities. They started to kind of break us up. And now when those newspapers are gone, who cares? they ceased being a community newspaper a long time ago, right? So I think it's little things like that, systemic, that happen for reasons that have nothing to do with the way people live their lives. It's just, let's change it to change it. And so I think centering community is going to the people that are affected by the issues and have them have a big part in dictating how it gets fixed.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think for us in our work, the way that we center community is to make sure that we're never talking about an unmet need or a risk without also talking about the incredible resilience and skills and assets that a person or family or community has to offer. And not losing sight of the fact that a person who doesn't have their basic needs met, that's violence, that's community violence that's being done. And so we just try really hard to hold what is serious and what is true and what denies the people we're working with and each other, our humanity, at the same time as acknowledging all of the resilience and creativity and stories that have allowed the person, the family, the community to get where they are at the point that we're interacting with them, and to not try to sort of rewrite that story or rewrite the narrative. One of the things I think that we're really good at is sometimes meeting someone where they're at with a problem that appears intractable, and really taking time to have many iterations of what we can do, building a relationship with that person, with that older adult and community, and knowing that the solution may not be the elimination of one of these risks or factors that other people are calling a problem, that are not problem for the person at the center of the story, and still being available even if that resolution doesn't tick all the boxes that a sort of system-based perspective might ask of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want, and please, audience, I know there's, lots of things to add, and you've probably got your own definitions of what centering community means to you. Please add those in the chat. That would be great, as we kind of co-create this together. And I just want to pull on a piece of what all three of you said that I think actually works together really well. So Jeanette, you started with, don't look at me as broken, right? I don't need to be fixed. And which I think leads to, Josefa, your point of viewing people as, yes, even if they need support or, some particular services and to have needs met, that everyone has assets and strengths and skills to build on. And so putting that hand in hand and not just viewing, communities that you want to engage with and center as places and people who are broken, need to be fixed, and don't actually have things that are working in their life and things that certainly can be, built on. And which brings me to the point that you had, Jose, which also means that the solutions lie in communities, and people in those communities can certainly help create the solutions. But that can't happen, and that view won't happen if we continue to sort of think of people as other and think of them as broken and, you need me to fix you. And so all three of those points, I think, really went hand in hand as we talk about centering community. There's a part of the title that's about shifting power and relationships. And so I want to kind of dive in a little bit around the power piece of this, and how do power dynamics play in centering community? What does that look like? What does it look like when, we're centering community well? And then what does the power dynamic look like when perhaps we're not doing it so well?
I'm going to jump in on something there. Something that's kind of bothered me a long time ago. I was asked to be on a task force that looked at domestic violence. I mean, not domestic, but just violence in the city, where we've had an incredible murder rate. Per capita, it's pretty high. And the idea was like, the mayor wanted to know what things can we do about dealing with this issue. And as we're sitting there, we had public meetings and people came and discussed, and they presented their ideas. They presented their frustrations with the system. Came to realize as we went along that there have been two other commissions prior to this, separated by a span of years. And we were given the reports, and I went and looked at the reports. And one of the saddest things that I found in those reports is that they had made recommendations that in the first presentation sounded good, right? By the time they get to the second convening, it's the same, recommendations with this idea to follow up. And then by the time it gets to us, we're talking about the exact same things, and we're separated by a distance of years, 15, 20 years. Maybe, I can't remember exactly, from the first one. And we invite people to come and speak publicly about how this has impacted them. And people are, yeah, they're very upset, and they tend to dominate the conversation. They may even be telling you stories you've heard before. And I sat there thinking, man, this is not going to get anywhere. Why we can't even involve community because they can't get past their frustration. And I think systemically that is the issue, because you've invited them before. When you had this commission, they came in and shared their frustrations. You came up with some ideas. You got thinkers in the room. You provided solutions. And instead of going back to the people and presenting what you had come up with, you had a press conference. And then it was up to the news media to follow. And then you went away and there was a report put out. Sadly enough, we did the same thing. But so what do people do? Well, I came here 15 years ago. I gave my story. It must not have been heard because nothing's happened. Come back 5 years later, the same thing. And now I come back again and you're getting mad because I'm repeating the stories. Obviously, you're not hearing them. I think that is the frustration. I think we have to work in ways to engage resources within the community that monitor. If you have a commission comes along, has recommendations and stuff, there are agents within the community, whether it be neighborhood groups or people that are working in some of the social services that represent the people, honestly, that are sitting there and saying, let's keep tabs on this. Let's have a strategic plan. How are you going to do this? And we'll be the ones, because we're the ones in community. We're going to challenge you. We're going to task you. But we don't give those kinds of powers to people. We reserve those powers for ourselves. And I mean ourselves, the systems. They do not want to share that kind of power. That's why when you have these conversations about defunding police, all of a sudden we're talking about chaos and murder and violence in the street without talking about efficiency, without talking about the things that communities need and want. And I think that's where we that's the disconnect. So
yeah, and I think the example that you just shared shows, not really centering community, but perhaps centering a process, right? That, led to a product that perhaps was transactional and, got community input, but really wasn't about sort of even long-term what the community was saying, what the community, needed. And so that's centering someone else's sort of, needs and outcomes when that happens. Other thoughts on sort of the power dynamic and that shift that needs to happen?
There's when Jose spoke about, transparency and I thought about what's happening today, 2020, with COVID, which is a nightmare for many of us. I lost a handful of people that I love. I live in a community that's a hot spot. And through all this, it took everyone at home because, the social distancing, quarantining at home, it took that for people to really see what we've been talking about for years, the injustice. There's no transparency in government offices. There's no transparency with agencies. So the COVID gave us a clear vision and really validated much of the work that we're doing today. We've been talking about injustice and resourcing communities that have been under-resourced. We've been talking about, supporting communities, but if you don't provide those resources, when I think about resources, I also think about when you want to build a house, you just don't have a hammer and a nail. You need lots of tools, machines. And so those are the type of resources, heavy duty machines that we need in our community to support young people, to support system involved folks, to support those humans that have neglected. So transparency, we have a clear vision of what communities need and what communities want. And Jose, thank you, because we always talk about, what's ahead of us, but we also have to look at behind us, Sankufa, what happened in the past, speaking to the elders. I love young people. I love young people. Our young people today, we got to teach peaceful protesting sometimes, but what they did today would say, I'm tired of what's been happening to my great-grandfather, my great-grandmother. Like, they look back and said, we're tired. We need resources in our community. And if it took some of us to act extra radical, then that's what we had to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about sort of and I think we make this point actually in the blueprint about, systems really understanding sort of the historical roots and the impacts of systems on communities, and, really coming to terms with that harm. And I think, really understanding the historical roots within community is important, just as important as sort of that future vision as well. So when this is done well, when we center community well, and you've talked about some of those elements already, what does that look like? And do you have like a specific example, whether that's from, your own work or just something that, you participated in or engaged in, where you're like, oh, that was different, and that, that really went well, that had some impact?
I'd like to illustrate a few examples by way of this question and the previous question about power.
Because I have, please, yeah,
two examples where I think the agency I work for has done a pretty good job of addressing it. So the first is to put a finer point on what Jose and Jeanette have also said beautifully, which is that we have to also address the power dynamics that are so stifling, like in this nonprofit industrial complex we all work in, many of us work in, and that what the movements of 2020 brought to LifePath was a key turning point where staff said, we need to hold each other accountable to the values that we're saying we produce in the world. And we have a ton of work to do internally. And not only do we need to do it, we need to recognize when we're not equipped to do it on our own. And we need the agency to use the agency resources to bring experts in to help us along this path. We need to make a time-based commitment ongoing, that it's not just like a thing we're doing in June, and also that we recognize that this is time and energy outside of our typical job duties, and to create space for creating change within the organizational structure as part of what helps us show as an essential function of our work with each other and in community. So I would say that needs to happen, and is really hard work, and something that that is worth the struggle. And another thing I would say about when it's worked well is that I hope this is not too in the weeds. This is a really specific example of work in adult protective services. So one of the tensions that we come up against is that people often think that what adult protective services does is like pluck people that are at risk out of their homes and put them in nursing homes, right? Or that we can force someone to take a specific kind of service, or force someone to move out of a home that has, an abuser or someone exploiting them, or where they don't have care, right? That there's all these sort of like coercive and ultimate and final tactics that we have the power to do and would do if we had the power, right? None of that is true. And also, there are a few very specific legal levers for when a person who is an older adult who has cognitive issues, can be from a number of organic reasons, has cognitive issues, and is not able to make decisions about their caregiving and their safety and community. And a lot of times, a person who's worried about that older adult, their family member, their neighbor, the person who's been caring for them, that's just done, right, puts a lot of pressure on our department to pull that lever. Well, can't you go to court? Isn't it time for them to have 24-hour care? They need to be in a nursing home. We hear that all the time. We get a report, this person needs to be in a nursing home. That's all the information we get, right? And so one of the things we do really well is to hold the line for each other about what our job is, how we can do our job in a person-centered way, that looks at community creatively, looks at resilience really creatively, tries to get on board all the different kinds of supports we can, and will not pull that lever unless it's absolutely necessary. And that's a lot of pressure that you can get from outside, because the risk very oftentimes is very real, and there's a dignity in risk that humans are allowed to engage in. And so so that's one of the times that we both sort of respond to that pressure, I think, really the power structure really well. And one of the times community center and community works in our system. I hope that was clear enough.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. An example of when this is done well, what it looks like, Jose or Jeanette?
I'm thinking about, I'm not sure how well they're done, but I think it's this idea of data, right? We have to really know what's going on, have a sense of it. There's a program here at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. We have a, what do you call it? Oh God, what do they call that? Civic, civic planning degree that's offered. And they do a lot of research. They go into community, they look at transportation modalities. They look at all the different services that are available. They do income breakdowns and everything. And it's like a really deep dive into community, into different areas of the city by zip code and all that. And I've always thought, it's an amazing thing that they do, because in a lot of ways they actually help set the conditions for policy to be made. And they're working with neighborhoods. The problem is that it's kind of like an innovative program. It should be a mandatory program across all universities in any kind of location where they live or work, because as banks are required to give a certain amount of investment to communities that they have offices in, so universities serve a public function, because in a lot of instances they are public institutions, and it should be part of the tax that goes into that, where you can go in there and actually dig down into what are the communities, what are the real, what is the income, what are the, what's the housing like, how many vacancies are there? I mean, they dig down so deep that I'm just kind of amazed sometimes that it isn't a program everywhere. And the sad thing about it is that it's not that well known outside of people that are engaged in civic planning, right? That, I think, to me is a place where you could really start to establish different kinds of systems that go up away from the ones that are existing, empower those with community people. The other one is just the one that happens every day that I'm amazed continues to happen. This pandemic has made it very clear. There's a lot of people suffering. And I'm amazed there's a little church from here. It's not really a church. It's a PAL, Police Athletic League. The guy that runs it took over it, made it into a boxing club and a place where kids come for art, an after school program. And they also have a garden they put out. They have these raised beds. They raise food for the community. And they are a distribution place. Just organically, this is their mission. They did not set out to do this. Community needs it. They're a central location in community. They arrange up to 150 or some packages of food. And I mean, not a little can here. I mean, complete dinners for family over time. And I think that is the smallest thing that keeps happening in spite of all these other things.
Yeah.
Need driven by partners that have the ability to put it together and allow and bring community in to share and pass it on.
And I think that also speaks to, what you said earlier in terms of people in community having solutions, right? So the pandemic, created a need, and it was community members who came up with strategy and solutions to help meet that need.
Especially now where there's so much need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jeanette, an example you want to share?
Well, I have an amazing example. I wish I can give you a tour, but we don't have time. My work is national, and I travel a lot, working with partnering with systems and bringing the voices of families that have been impacted by the justice system, the juvenile justice system. And this past year, I was able to create a space in a community that has been neglected for many, many years, where during COVID, we were able to also support from this new space that's visible to the community, COVID relief for anyone returning home. We want our loved one to return home. We embrace our loved ones, but we're not investing in those communities. We're not supporting those families to embrace and deal with the necessities that another human being is going to bring to the home. So we've been providing COVID relief, whether it's to buy food, necessities for the home, so that that loved one that returned home is not a burden. Um, we've been providing food to the community. We've served over 500 families in the community with organic fruits and vegetables purchased from a local farm. So we want to support community. We want to be able to bring awareness to some of the injustice that's happening. So we created a space where families can come and get that one-to-one support, to get that COVID relief help, just and even to call a school to do some school advocacy. We know that families have been dealing with more challenges than ever when it comes to the school. The virtual is not as easy as some folks may think it is. And we also have systems that like to threaten families with other systems. So just providing families with that support, so that it's not just additional burden on them. Oh, I'm sorry. I have a visitor, my granddaughter, who I haven't seen
It's quite all right.
since Thanksgiving.
That's great. Let me go to the other side, flip to the other side. No, that's fine, please. Flip to the other side of the, yeah, this is community in action right here. Flip to the other side of the coin, you know. So we've talked a bit about how you all define centering community, you know, what this looks like when done well, some of the elements around centering community.
It's about them.
Yes, Tanya, it's about the.
Just because they're my grandkids, I'm not saying this, but I'm doing it because I saw the bigger picture beyond my son, who introduced me to this. And through this nightmare, I couldn't believe that families were dealing with so much hardship. I live in a community where system involvement is a revolving door for everyone. But what happens at home stays at home. Yeah. That's how we were raised. Yeah. But I say, no, the system cannot continue destroying our families and our young people. And so it's not no longer about my son and my grandkids. It's about their peers. You know, we say our families because we all family, we all related. Somebody used to say to me, Jeanette, Puerto Rican people are related to everybody. I said, we familia. I don't know, familia. But it's about our young people. And once we leave, are they okay? Will they be okay?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Jeanette. Let's talk a little bit about, you know, the flip side of this. What are the things that we just commonly get wrong about centering community? And you know, it doesn't even have to be at the end of the spectrum of truly centering community. Even when we're just trying to engage with community and build relationships with community, what are the common mistakes that we often make, and the things that we should just stop doing?
I'm gonna speak as an artist.
Let's go to Jose first, and then I'll get to you, Jeanette.
I was going to speak as an artist on this. I forgot to give. I actually do have an official role. I have a title. I work for the Kansas Creative Arts Industry Commission, and I'm kind of like the person that looks at some grants and works with artists on diversity, inclusion. That nice big term, right? I always forget the other one, but it's that nice little term. And one of the things that I see that we always get wrong, there are well-intentioned groups that want to step outside of their comfort zone, right? In theater, in whether it's dance, whatever it may be. They want to do programming with community, and they realize that there are marginalized communities within their own community that nobody ever tells their stories. And they want to go in there and think about how you do that. And they want to promote it, and they want to get engaged. And often they bring their biases into this thing. You know, they just assume that if you reach out and say, hey, hello, I'm going to do this, and I want to engage the African American community in this, or hey, I want the Latino community to do this. This is my project. I have a theater. I have whatever it may be, right? And assume that all you have to do is say, hello, look what I'm going to do. And people are going to be so jubilant and grateful that you come up that they're going to say, oh, sign me up. But people are going to look at you kind of like askance. They're going to go, well, who's this person? You have to know the community more than just coming in and showing up and saying, I got it. Even if you're well-intentioned. I've done this wrong before. I've done this wrong, assumed that I had a solution only because my intention was so good. I came in basically as a conqueror, as a colonist in that sense. I mean, I take on the trappings. Find the people within community that are already thinking about these things. We're not the only ones that want to, that have this way of telling a story. People have been telling stories within communities for years. And I use that idea of the narrative. Get to know them. You cannot come in and do a project and say, I'm going to be socially conscious. I'm going to do a social justice program. And darn it, it's going to start in 4 months. And it's all going to go, and assume that every step is right. No, people are not going to trust you just because you have good intentions. Cultivate relationships, build networks that are based on community, sincerely based on community, not just what you can get out of it to satisfy some emotional need that you need to have to assuage some kind of guilt that you've developed. White guilt doesn't do anything for anybody, honestly. It's just a way to excuse yourself and say, oh, I'm woke. No, you haven't done anything. Go outside, go into those communities, start working within those communities. And I think that's the biggest mistake we make. We just assume I care. That's all I need to do. Everything will fall in place.
And there are no shortcuts, right? To get there, right? To build the building relationships and the trust that all takes time. It can't be on your timeline because you want to launch this program or this project. Sorry, I'm interjecting more than my facilitator role here. Jeanette, what do we need to stop doing?
No one wants to take responsibility for their action, for their contribution. It's about connections. It's about respect. It's about beyond the 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. You know, the community knows when you're real and when you just come to do a check off of I did that, you know, I can die in peace now. I took care of that issue. Families, the communities, they sniff whether you real or not. And to me, this is honestly beyond Monday through Friday, beyond the 9 to 5. And if you really want to partner and support communities, you have to think beyond that. Oh, I'm only available Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Many of the issues are beyond the 9 to 5, on weekends. You know, this time, you know, even during the holidays, many folks take time. I mean, I respect all that. I honor the self-care, but I like to put in extra time during those days because those are when the issues arise, depression, the mental health wellness, the need is there. And so that to me, that's what it means. Beyond the 9 to 5, we know real, and there's enough people to serve. You know, when folks come into certain communities, it's about a number. It's about that one number. But to us, it's beyond that number. It's about that number is a whole family, a whole unit. So beyond the 9 to 5, beyond the Monday through Friday, embracing the diversity of the community that you serve, helping communities feel welcome, helping communities understand that we want you here. This is your space, and that respect that we can partner. I don't have all the solutions, but as a community, we can resolve any issues that come because we're resilient. Resiliency is what's I think keeping us going through these challenging times.
Absolutely. Josefa, things you want to tell
Yeah.
folks, stop doing this now.
I have one very general example and one really specific one. So my background is in public health, and I was very often in rooms where we're having this conversation and people with a specific expertise or a goal to develop a specific expertise, like someone who was training to be an epidemiologist or an evaluator or a program, someone to do health promotion programs, would say, well, you know, like, how do I escape this tension if I need to like go where the problem is, right? And it's like, first of all, there's problems in your own community. Second of all, examine that impulse, that conqueror impulse, as they called it, right? Like, what about the legacies of white supremacy and colonization in our field are causing you to think that you need to go and bring this to someplace else? And talk to people who are doing it well about how do you make your expertise available for a community-centered, for an effort growing out of community when they ask you for what they need and you're able to support, rather than coming and saying, here, you need this. And, you know, I think that we're getting better at it, but public health has a long way to go. I would say that I've been in the field for a little over a decade, and not much has changed in terms of like, well, how many focus groups during the needs assessment process, and like how many community stakeholders are at the table during evaluation. And we can challenge each other to be much more creative than that, and to recognize like where ego and sort of institutional ego is playing a role there.
Yeah.
And the really specific thing that I see happen is that again, I think that some of the participants in the call who work within organizational structures might find common ground in this. I apologize if it's too specific an example, but Adult Protective Services is a really specific program, and we function within regulations. And I think when we're tired, we rely on what the regulations require of us rather than what we know about what gets the work done really well. And there's not a lot of checks and balances to account for that. You know, burnout is real, moral hazard is real, ennui is real. And so, you know, I think that that's something we don't always get right, but we're all working on it. And many of us have relationships with each other where if we hear someone sort of talking about the work or talking about a challenge that's going down that road, we can support each other and to think more expansively, in a more client-centered way, in a more community-centered way about how to address that problem. And so, you know, I do think that we have some tools to use to address that.
Yeah, that's great.
Can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
Tanya?
Yeah, go ahead.
And one of the things that we're working on in supporting communities is understanding a lot of these policies and regulations that have been impacting families and communities in a negative way. So how do we hold our local politicians accountable and now, you know, these decisions that they make and the platforms that are against us, how do we hold them accountable? How do we provide families with these tools so that they know who they're voting for and what are some of these policies and regulations that they're voting on that are affecting them?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think even broader than just the elected officials, right? There's sort of capital P policies and lowercase p policies. And certainly that's what we're, you know, trying, the structural change that we're driving for as part of the well-being blueprint of not only getting to a place where individuals aren't just sort of falling back on what do I have to do just because this is the regulation and, you know, that being the default, but how do we just get rid of the regulations and the policies and the processes that actually aren't working for people, aren't making their lives better, are putting up barriers and making it much more difficult for them to, access their own well-being and to thrive as individuals, as families, as communities. So I'm looking at the time, and I want to make sure we get to Phyllis so we can hear a little bit about some of the stuff that the audience has been sharing through chat. And I want to make sure we have some time for to get questions from the audience. So, and there's Phyllis out from the shadows.
Yes.
So what have folks been sharing with us?
Thank you. And hello, everybody. Great comments in the chat. I have to say right off top, everybody loved your grandkids, Jeanette. So just get that out of the way. But there were some common themes in the chat around elements of centering community. One theme was around community defining the needs and the desires and community driving the process. That came up several times. And also having community involved in the decision making from the beginning and not coming in after decisions have been made, but that they are active co-creators of what the questions are and what the plan should be. The other piece was about relationships. Another theme was about relationships, words like true partnerships based on community goals, co-struggling, and vested relationships. Those were some of the words and comments that we had about the very important point of developing relationships. And this work can't happen without developing really authentic relationships with people. Then we had two questions. So one was, Josefa had mentioned, had used the term dignity and risk. So there was a question about that. And then the other question was from, I believe her name was Emma, and she was from a small community and talking about churches and sometimes how you can get into that do-gooder role and how can we pull folks who, as Jose said, have good intentions into the idea of its empowerment for the community members, not our thoughts and ideas about what should happen, but it should be about what the community wants.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So let's open it up to additional questions. You can submit a question through Q&A, or you can raise your hand and we'll sort of bring you forth to ask a question. And as folks are doing that and getting, sort of questions teed up, I'm wondering, because we've been talking about, and certainly the kind of summary of some of the comments that were in chat, really building on this notion of, right, this takes building relationships. And I'm wondering, are our sort of traditional community engagement approaches, do they actually recognize community leadership? Are the ways we think about like how leadership shows up in communities sort of the right ways? I think, Jose, you were getting at, I think it was you, Jose, sort of getting to the, there are people in communities, right, who got the history, who know the stories. We all know people in communities, in our neighborhood. Like, if you wanted to, in my neighborhood growing up, if you wanted to get something done, go to Miss Wheeler, make sure she knows, and then she's going to make sure you get connected with the right people who, need to know. But how do we think about like community leadership, what that looks like, and do enough folks from organizations and systems even know how to identify and, identify who true community leaders are?
This is something I think about a lot, because my idea is always okay, you complain about something, but what's the solution? And after a while, you get tired of complaining. And so I'm always trying to figure out how do you bring a solution to the table? And I'm thinking often, so like you have, say, a tax proposal that goes through that's going to target an area of the city that has not been invested in by traditional models. The city has to step in. So we raise a tax, the people vote on it. That's happened here. So you start to see all of a sudden these projects start popping up, and they get approved through kind of quasi-governmental agencies, like you appoint a citizen and they'll sit there and they'll be talking about a improvement project in an area they've never been in, right?
Yeah.
So I think what you look for is you start to looking for those mechanisms to say if a certain amount of money has been invested in this council district, then let's find the people in that district to be the ones that help determine and have those conversations. They're an advisory board. Why should they not then begin to reflect the community they're in? That's a very, uh, kind of
Yeah.
easy solution to me. But the thing I think that makes it impossible to happen sometimes is these appointments are made to commissions because of how well are they known in the broader community.
Right.
I got
Right.
asked to be in it because I think I've been a loudmouth about some things, but I'm also an artist that has been around some things. Um, but that doesn't make me an expert in that community. I would like to see those things then be broken up, take it down to the community center level, take it down to the community level, the neighborhood association level, but actually not give them just a voice, but actual real power in contributing to those positions. I think
Yeah.
coming out of COVID, we have to start thinking really clearly about those kinds of solutions because we've seen just how inadequate at the federal level, at the local level, at the state level, our response to any kind of emergency is.
Yeah.
The next
Yeah.
pandemic, we're not even going to have questions if we're not ready for it. We have
Yeah.
to have community and big engagement there.
Let me there are a couple of questions from folks that people put in Q&A, so let me make sure I get to those. So what does an accountable relationship between system actors or outside actors and community members look like for you all?
I think for me, that has to do some accounting for the way that the capitalist impulse fetishizes professionalism, right? That we're not just picking the person who can wear the right clothes and knows how to identify themselves and has some letters after their name or has self-appointed as a representative of community, and to be able to slow way down. So I think one of the reasons why it's been really instructive for me to listen to Jose as part of this conversation and talking about art and creative process is that one of the things that's been most effective for me when I'm faced with these questions is to remember and use the tools of narrative methods in eliciting responses about community needs and community assets, and this idea of asking telling the story and finding oftentimes an older adult, an elder in the community, someone who's been around, someone who has a lot of connections, and listening to a number of stories before you identify what themes are developing and to come. And so I think that centering those stories and decentering professionalism in those relationships between a structure or an organization and community members have been really important for me.
There's another question here on what's the most powerful example of a true shift in power that actually unlocks or unbinds the power in community that you've come across in your work?
I'll give you two examples real quick, mainly because I'm just amazed by them. But so we have a tenants group that started here in Kansas City, KC Tenants Rights Group. Up until pandemic hit, which I think has given the power structure so many excuses to come in and do a lot of good work. They were actually uniting and representing tenants in low-income housing and in tenants' rights, and really started to get on the agenda, and not just as kind of these radical group, but saying, hey, tenants have a right. I mean, some of us are living on the margins. These kinds of rights to kind of bend a little bit to reflect that reality. And they got very involved. They're very I really admire them. They come very much from grassroots community, and they're sticking with it. And I'm hoping they survive that. The other part of that also then comes from this. I got the other example I was trying to think of. Shoot, it slipped my mind. I got so caught up with this thing. Oh no, the wage, the minimum wage thing. Uh, this started from people working in restaurants, being affected by this idea that to make $15 is crazy. Like you're going to break the bank if you pay people that are barely making enough to live on, just not even a livable wage, a wage increase. That somehow that's going to destroy this country. That's ridiculous. I mean, that kind of perception has to change, and I think they've proven it by the fact that they've told their story, and people are going, yeah, how the hell do you live on $15 an hour even? But 745, 750, whatever the minimum wage is. So those two to me are very strong things that are coming, and the people that are engaged in them that I've seen here in Kansas City, it's a broad spectrum of people, and I think that's what's the hopeful part of it.
As I knew, time would fly by, and I feel like I could talk with the three of you for another hour. But alas, we are getting towards the end of our time together. So I do want to thank you all very much for participating and really sharing your insights, your expertise, your advice. We have a evaluation form that's really brief that we'd love folks to fill out. If these events really aren't meeting your needs and valuable to you and the work that you're doing and passionate about, then we've missed the mark. So giving us feedback and ideas for other topics that you'd love for us to focus on in future events is always welcome. And I'd love to advance my slide, but it seems to be stuck. So, and then what we're going to do with not just what Jeanette and Jose and Josefa shared with us, but all of the great comments from the chat. We're going to be taking all of that and putting that together as a resource document around centering community. So when I said we were really going to be kind of co-creating this today and co-creating that definition of centering community, that's exactly what I meant. So in about a week, we'll get a resource document out to everyone who attended this event, and we'll certainly have it posted on our website. But so thank the audience as well for adding to that and making what I think will be a great resource for folks. This is, the first event on centering community, but certainly won't be the last. There are so many other things to talk about and to dig into. So look for future events that really get at this piece on centering community. And one of the participants, I think, put in chat, we don't want centering community to just be something people say, right? That just is a term people throw out there and then actually doesn't have a lot of meaning. And certainly that's what all of you are helping us do today. And we hope you'll join us for future events and help us dig into this even more. Bring others along and share. And as always, visit wellbeingblueprint.org for more information and be able to share and see examples there. So thank you so much, Jeanette, Jose, Josefa. Absolutely wonderful. And for all of you, your passion for what you do and how you feel about this topic certainly came through. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Thanks.
Thanks for having me. Thank you, everybody.